Welcome to Contracting Conversations. My name is Jim Valley, and I'm joined by my co-host, Scott Williams. Today, our conversation is with David Dotson. He's a professor of contract management for DAU in the Mid-Atlantic region. David is our learning asset manager for DAU's COR 222 class, a moderator for the COR Community of Practice, and DAU's weekly event series called the COR Office Hours. David, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the 3 golden rules of COR.
Yes, I'm looking forward to hearing about these 3 golden rules. So go ahead, begin with your sharing. I want to know.
Well, the way this thing came about was a person gets nominated to be a COR. They've got a lot of stuff to pay attention to, in addition to their regular job, because oftentimes it's an additional duty as assigned. And they've got things like the DoD instruction 5072, which is all about what DoD does with CORs and their training. So they're paying attention to that. They've got their agency or service directives. They've got reporting systems. They've got training they've got to accomplish. And then they've got to worry about the contract. They're picked as a COR for a specific contract. And so they've got to be concerned about all of that. It can be a huge amount of information. And it all seems disconnected. So we needed some sort of foundation.
Right. And as we all know, they may have an additional duty besides, or that might be their additional duty. So they're pretty busy.
Absolutely. And sometimes the COR is chosen because they are the subject matter expert in a particular, whatever it is, whatever service or product that's being put onto contract. They're the subject matter expert. So not only are they worried about being the COR, but they're very comfortable being in the position that, well, I know what I'm talking about. I'm the person that everybody comes to ask the question about this particular item. And that comfort with being the subject matter expert can sometimes cause problems when executing COR duties. Let me show you what those 3 rules are. I've got a slide there. That's it. Those are the 3 rules right there. Contract forms the entire relationship between the government and the contractor. Rule number 2, only the contracting officer can modify that contract. And rule number 3, the COR is not the contracting officer.
Yeah, Dave, I know that's been problematic in at least my history dealing with CORs, but why start with the contract? That's not typically done by the COR.
Well, Scott, that's an excellent observation. The contract is done by the contracting officer, and the contract forms that entire relationship. It has to do with the sovereignty of government and the relationship between the sovereign government and the people that are subject to that sovereignty. The contract levels that playing field in a sense by the power playing field. Right? It'd be very hard to do business with a sovereign entity that something's right just because they say this is what we're going to do. What the contract does is it kind of gets rid of a little bit of that sovereignty and it elevates the contractor to the same playing field as the government, and they're able to enforce the contract on each other. If the contractor provides the service or provides the goods, then they can enforce the requirement of the government to pay what was agreed upon within the contract. So outside of that contract, the government is always sovereign. And that's just a really risky place to be if you're not of equal power. So we start with the contract because everything else is built upon that creation of an equal playing field. But it's within the 4 corners of the contract. If you think of a piece of paper, right, and you've got 4 corners, what prints out when you hit print, that's what's in the contract. If it doesn't print out, it's not in there. So if it's not written on the paper, government is still sovereign. It's all about the trust to be able to make that agreement with the government.
Okay, and David, that makes sense, right? The contracting officer is responsible for that contract and all that. But how does the COR play into that? I think there's confusion amongst many on how they play. And we know obviously the contracting officer is the one with authority to obligate the government.
Yeah, That's an excellent point. There is a lot of confusion there. The reason the contracting officer is the single person who can obligate the government and nobody else is to help neck down that sovereign power that the government has so that everybody can know, hey, in my contract, unless I get a change, a modification in writing from that individual who's the contracting officer, I can bank on the fact that my contract is what it is, what I read there. There's not going to be any hidden changes involved. So when you look at the COR has a little bit of authority specifically delegated for that specific contract from the contracting officer. Basically, the COR's job is to be the eyes and the ears of the contracting officer. Contracting officer can't be everywhere when the contract is being executed, but the contracting officer is the only one that can adjust the contract as real life happens during the execution of that contract. Well, you've got an inherently risky situation there. The COR is going to be the eyes and the ears of the contract out there with the contractor who's performing, and they're reporting back to the contracting officer, here's the situation. The contracting officer is the one that can change the contract if necessary to make it match real life. But sometimes the COR would look like they're the ones that are going to be making that change. And therein lies the risk, because then that destroys the confidence that this contract is describing the entire relationship.
Excellent. So one thing about these three rules, it seems like rules 2 and 3 are a little repetitive. Is there a reason why you did it that way?
Yeah, they are a little bit repetitive. We tried to use a little bit of humor to reinforce the fact that there's 3 rules here, but there's really only 2. And when you think about it, there's really only one, and that is the COR's not the contracting officer, right? So the contract is the foundation. It's the entire relationship, and it can only be changed by written modification signed by the contracting officer. And then the last one is just to remind everybody, and when we do the COR 222 class, we say this over and over again. Who's the contracting officer? The appropriate response is not me, right? Because everybody in there is going to be a COR. And just driving home that point also has to do with authority, right? Because it can look to the contractor like the COR has the authority to make these changes. They're the subject matter expert. They're on the ground all the time. They're interacting with them. So we have to work on the government side constantly to remind people, hey, there is a contracting officer. It's not me. We put that on our emails. We put that on the back of our business cards. Every interaction we have with the contractor, which are necessary to be the eyes and the ears, we have to collect information, get it back to the contracting officer. But every one of those interactions, we want to take the opportunity to remind the contractor, we are not the COR. Even if there will be changes coming to the contract based on our conversations today, don't make any change until you get that written modification signed by the contracting officer. These 3 rules, a COR can pretty much figure out what they need to do in any given situation if they keep these in mind.
All right, thanks, David. I just want to say that we have videos out there on COR 222, which you mentioned that you teach, and also on CLM 222. Both excellent courses. Obviously, COR 222 is in person or virtual. And if you have a team out there that's going to be going to get deployed or something, that I can't imagine a better course than doing that in person. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, wonderful, Dave. Hey, folks, that's all the time we have for today. But just as a reminder, you can find our podcast on DAU Media, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our Contracting Conversation channel. Type any comments below to include any questions you have for future discussions, and help spread the word of this channel to your peers and to those you supervise or lead. Let us help you answer their questions, and we look forward to having future contracting conversations with you.